Zëw Rën. Welcome to the first part of a series of brief instructionals on how to speak, write, and use the Rën language. The Rën language, also known as Zëw Rën in its own words, is a philosophical constructed language used in tandem with monistic philosophy in order to better describe the world in non-dual terms. That was a bit of a mouthful, but in other words, it is a language that describes the universe, as best it can, through the lens of the universe itself as a unified whole, rather than through the eyes of a speaker. That is what we mean by non-duality. There is not me and you. There is just one thing, and that thing can be called the universe, or what we call Rën. This presentation will go more into just what this means, what it means to be non-dual, and then it will discuss how Zëw Rën uses this philosophy in linguistic terms. Finally, it will examine why one would wish to learn Rën. So let's get started with a quick introduction to a section of the philosophy and why it calls for its own special language. This is a section from the Nameless Rën scripture. The section is called Loke, and it says, "We speak a language reflecting our philosophical format, a flowing script and speech with pleasing sound when whispered, a single word for all with life and mind and motion, meek, or regal, upright, quadruped, winged or in water. Rën declare, a word for all beings and sheer awareness, weighted with reverence, rapport, and passion, Rën resounding. So ends the noun, the name of things, of grammar most useless. Nearer we draw to thought without ego. Language sans language. We write our meditations through its terms and grammar. We take it daily, a line or thought with the law of oneness. We learn to contemplate with Rën the spoken center, soul, and singular source of sentience and being." Now there's a lot in this verse, and in my interpretation it gets right to the heart of the Rën philosophy, talking about life, about oneness, and about the path, the goal of the entire poem, the entire scripture. This having been said, as much as it encompasses, it is not very self-explanatory. It does not talk about why we are disposing of names, and what exactly is this law of oneness. What is oneness? What does Rën even mean? Rën might be translated sometimes as life or being, sometimes just as God. Earlier I translated it as universe, but it is something of a unique concept. The philosophy states that rather than all of us having our own individual sources of consciousness, our own sources of that feeling of being me, that I am not you, I am no one but me, and I feel that instinctively, that consciousness is actually not distinct between beings, and that I, my true self, is not limited to this body, to this mind. That I actually am you and you are me, and that every being, every object that has had this sense of I-ness throughout history of everything, is in truth a single consciousness that is the source of all happenings. That single consciousness, that source, is what we call Rën. In the next slide, I will read a metaphor used frequently in the Rën philosophy to illustrate what this Rën, what this idea of oneness means to us. Lem. Imagine all existence, a play performed to perfection, physics founding the forming of galaxies, stars, and planets, the first of all life, to every person and creature encountered characters, both good and bad, to tell the story until the final end, when all is fallen curtains. Forth then comes the crew to bow and curtsy, the craftsmen for the props and all the artists, the actors, writers, producers removing their masks, and every man and woman and creature and thing are the same and single soul, at once beyond and within all that's created. Do not worry much if the idea is difficult to wrap your head around. Understanding this is one of the ultimate goals of the Rën philosophy, and the language is one of the primary tools that we use to reach that goal. So, the Rën philosophy is non-dual. So the language only uses a single word for everything that we consider animate, to be alive, to have volition. This single word is, of course, Rën. It is always in the singular, never negated, never pluralized, because it is considered to be indivisible. It is only inflected, changed, when the speaker is referring to a specific entity with that sense of I am. So while Rën na could be me, Rën now could refer to you, who is listening to this presentation, Rën ya could refer to my cat, who is asleep in my chair. We are all in actuality Rën. So, in applying this concept, as well as the other important concepts in Zëw Rën, that is, speaking the language, writing the language, translating our thoughts into this language, we can shape, in theory, how we think, how we interpret the world, and as such, it becomes that important tool in cultivating a sense of non-duality in our lives. So, as a recap, what is Rën? Quickly, before we get into that, it might be noticed that the titles of each slide are translated. The first word there is nin, which is the question word, what, and altogether it says nin Zëw Rën. A very simple sentence, a very simple translation. So what is Zëw Rën? What is the Rën language? Rën is non-duality expressed in language, as a tool to help develop a sense and understanding of non-duality in the speaker. It is made to be simple, without unnecessary complications that do not lend themselves to the philosophy or to the aesthetics of the language. It is highly regular, meaning that there are very few exceptions to its rules. It is naturally poetic and leads itself to rhyming, to alliteration, to rhythm, concrete poetry, and it is made to be contemplative and specifically addresses causality and requires the speaker to be aware of their own mental state in order to speak or write it accurately. If this all sounds overwhelming, it should be quickly pointed out that Rën lacks much of what often makes language learning difficult. It does not contain gender, all nouns are inanimate, all are inflected the same, and verbs do not change depending on the noun that they are paired with. The language has no tense and no aspect. There is no past tense, there is no future tense. As far as Rën is concerned, everything that happens is happening right now. There are no declensions or any other complications, and as pointed out, Rën is unnaturally regular, and there are very few exceptions to its rules. This is the last slide, and will just be a quick wrap-up. Nindach sich Zëw Rën. Why learn Rën? There are the benefits that come from learning any second language. It is good for the mind, it helps us broaden our perspectives, it gives us another tool to create art, poetry. It has a beautiful script that lends itself to calligraphy, and because of how it is written in layers that must be drawn accurately, it will enhance one's penmanship if they practice. Perhaps more topically, however, Zëw Rën is best used in meditative practice, translating thoughts, notions, and writing them out as they occur, in order to transform dualistic thinking into non-dualistic thinking, and ultimately to humble and diminish the ego, that illusory sense of separate and distinct self. Rën is not the only non-dual philosophy in the world, of course, and such a practice will help anyone with an interest in mysticism or in Dharma. So Hindu, Buddhist, Jain philosophies, Sikh philosophy, as well as Sufi Islamic thought, all hold non-duality and ego death to be important beliefs and practices. And the language does not require fluency. I wish to add this as a final note. If you find yourself interested, if you wish to continue learning through these presentations and other resources, you should be aware that this is not a language that is intended for interpersonal communication. It is not well suited for having conversations, or for writing stories or descriptive letters, but rather for thoughts, observations, poetry, devotionals. As such, the learner will always have the time and the freedom to refer back to their resources in crafting utterances in the language. So it is not fluency that is the speaker's priority, but competency. Using the language as effectively as one can for the purposes for which the language was made. With that, Rën, thank you for watching and listening. There will be further presentations to follow, but for now, do have a look at the available resources and leave comments with any questions or suggestions for future presentations. I wish you all the best in your journey.